And we used to do a few things. Good morning. This is the New York City Board of Standards and Appeals Public Review Session for March 23rd, 2015. We'll begin with a special order calendar, continued hearing items. Item number 1, 17279 BC, 16704 Northern Boulevard, Queens.
Okay, so in terms of submissions, we received a letter February 5th that argues that no restriction should be placed on the ownership or type of business, so it should just be a use group 6B office, and that no parking is required since 9 spaces are waived, since there's less than the 10 minimum, and the request is for 7. They argue that the existing sign should be permitted, but they don't tell us whether it complies with the C1 regulations. At the last hearing, we asked them to present this sign to DOB and have DOB determine whether or not it's complying. There's no argument to support a variance for a non-complying sign, and it seems like it could easily be modified if it's not complying. They also never responded to the issue of the loss of the handicapped accessible parking space and the chain post closures, and the replacement of the dead or missing planting, all of which was discussed at the hearing. There is a 1979 letter from DOB that shows that the commercial use was existing on the site prior to the variance, but that enlargements were made without permits. I would like them to respond to those questions. We can condition approval on compliance with the C1 signage regulations and limit to 10 years. I'd suggest a use group 6 professional office, so that, because in fact it has shifted between real estate and lawyers and accountants and things like that. And I'm okay with the 7 parking spaces, so I think the biggest issue is really the sign. Any other comment?
I think the only issue about the signage has to do with how much is illuminated.
Right.
But I think they should clarify that, and if it's only slightly over, I think they could bring it into compliance easily.
Okay. Anyone else?
No, sounds good.
Item number 2, 16494 BC, 84 Hugh Grant Circle, the Bronx.
Okay. This one is the Lucille Roberts PC, which has been operating since 1990 without a C of O. So that's what's giving me pause about moving forward with this, because if they haven't gotten it in whatever number of decades that is, why should we trust them to get it in the future? The submission from the expediter basically states that they will never be able to get the C of O due to non-compliances of the adjoining tenants, where there are open applications, some of which implicate life safety risks. One inspection noted that there's a lack of adequate fire stop between the cellar and the first floor area of the public assembly. I think that the only way to really deal with this is to involve the landlord, because that's actually his responsibility, or his or her responsibility, to make sure that the building is in compliance, and to make sure that a C of O can be obtained. The current C of O allows a restaurant and retail, and I just don't think it's correct for us to be in a position of permitting illegal occupancy, which is clearly what will go on if it continues like this. Anyone else?
No, I agree. I was troubled with the expediter's explanation that they could not get a final CO, and I think our question was whether they could possibly get a TCO, temporary certificate of occupancy, based on completion of their space and whether or not their space was code compliant. In relationship to whether a violation has to do with their space and another space, they need to discuss that with the owner and make sure that they can clear that, because indeed it could go on forever, and we would never, know whether or not they complied with anything. So I think they need to figure out a solution.
Right. Anyone else?
No.
Oh, they did remove the graffiti, and they showed photos, but it's probably a good idea to put it as a condition of the grant going forward that there should be expeditious graffiti removal.
New cases, item number 3, 2602BZ, 1680 Richmond Avenue, Staten Island.
Okay. So this is essentially a reinstatement of a variance that expired in 2012, and they're coming here to modify the building to convert service space to convenience store and make the store ADA compliant. There were some changes to the approved plans, which includes DEC remediation equipment and different tank sizes and so on, different location of the canopy extension over the pumps, located a little bit closer to the street, angle of the sign. They did provide seeker protocol affidavit that the UST and other sources of contamination have been removed or otherwise under DEC or fire department supervision, all of which is something we normally request, so that's good that they provided that. My questions are, what is the temporary structure on the site? I assume that that's the monitoring equipment, but they don't say. And then what is the monitoring equipment? They also don't actually tell us what that is. They should provide information. They showed that the sign, they did show that the sign oriented kind of both to Victory and Richmond meets the C12 regulations. And then I also wonder, what's the purpose of the 250-gallon waste tank, and what's the alternative? They're saying that they're going to remove that. What's their plan if they remove that? But otherwise, from what I can see from photographs, the site looks clean. Anybody else?
The prior approved plans had landscaping around the sign. There was a planter box, and also in the southwest corner of the site, which they have removed. And the container there is for the remediation equipment, and supposedly they were told to operate it for 3 years, beginning in 2013. So assuming that they have 1 more year to go, they should give us proposed plans without the container on the site.
Also, they show that the cars now are parked parallel, they used to be parked parallel to that container, but now they're showing them perpendicular, and it looks like they only have about 20 feet between sort of the rear of a car and another car pulling up to go to the gas station. And I'm wondering if they have enough space there for maneuverability for cars that might be parked in that area.
Between the container.
The container, yeah. Right now, they're showing them the spots as parallel to that container, so people are pulling up right next to it. But in their new plan, they show them as being perpendicular, cars being perpendicular to the container, which has them sticking out into the lane of traffic.
Anything? No. Okay.
Item number 4, 15004BZ, 129 Elizabeth Street, Manhattan.
Okay. So this is also an amendment of a variance granted in 2006 for a very tiny site. That it has a lot area of 789 square feet, and subsequent to the grant, there was a successful adverse possession claim by a neighbor, which removed a triangular slice from the edge. I note that on the statement of facts, there's a cut and paste of that image, and the little triangle migrated somehow, I don't actually know how that happens, into the middle of the site. Yeah. So that's not the right image, because that would be a very interesting adverse possession claim. So that should be corrected. They do need, however, for me to describe better what the removal of the triangle from the lot does to require the need for more floor area and height, and how that leads to a minimum variance to realize a reasonable return in a way that the revised lot size does not. There's no question that the floors are very cramped. They were in the prior condition because it's such a tiny site, and that the requested height is consistent with neighborhood character, that the height of the building is consistent. The reason for the need to enlarge the commercial area where the mezzanine is understood, but there's also a 600 square foot cellar for the retail. So I'm not sure exactly what drives the need to enlarge the retail all of a sudden. It wasn't needed before. And if this is only 24 square feet, how does that really shift the number so much that you need the mezzanine? That's the part I'm not really getting, and it wasn't explained. My other question, and maybe it's exempt in some way, I'm not sure how does that retail space that's 3 levels meet ADA requirements? And even the building itself, I think because it's a 2-family, there's no ADA requirement. And I also wonder, I'm not sure why this was done, there's this tiny balcony at the rear, and the only way you get to it is walking between bathrooms or a kitchen. It's not exactly, maybe they consider it to be an asset, and that's a design decision, but I'm wondering, and it does reduce the lot coverage. If they built out there, it would make it 100% lot coverage, so that's a further waiver. But just wondering, like, what's up with that? Would they prefer to have that inside the building as opposed to outside the building? Anyone else?
I actually agree with you. I think that there has to be more information as to what is actually lost on the plans. It would be helpful if they would, like, dimension the different rooms so we could see if the rooms are actually constricted a little bit, which would lead to the loss of income that I guess they're trying to recapture by adding to the retail space. But, you know, and I understand that they have to raise the height for the retail space in order to fit that mezzanine in, but there really isn't any reason to raise the floor-to-floor heights of the other 2 floors, which they do as well by 1 foot each. So they would have to explain why that's necessary also to compensate for the 26 feet of loss per floor. So I'm not sure that they would have a minimum variance if they do make these amendments.
And the only thing I can think of with floor-to-floor is since this was approved in 2006, the market has changed. And there's expectation now, perhaps, of higher floor-to-floor. Don't know, but they didn't explain that to us. Yeah.
And since we had a C finding previously, I would like them to give us streetscapes with the revised bulk of the building to show how it fits into the area. And again, I question the floor-to-floor heights. Didn't seem necessary.
And could they clarify whether or not they changed the bedroom count in the apartments? I think previously they had 2 bedrooms, but it looks like, I mean, they're saying that they have 2 bedrooms now, but they clearly have a space that could become a 3rd bedroom, a legal 3rd bedroom, and I'm wondering why they didn't say it was a 3-bedroom duplex as opposed to just a 2-bedroom duplex, whether that makes a difference.
Great, thank you.
Item number 5, 5106BZ, 18802 Union Turnpike, Queens.
Okay, this is to amend a variance that allowed a physical cultural establishment and a dance studio, and the variance was from 2006. Oh, and, yeah. So, the reason for the variance to expand more on the first floor for the dance studio isn't well established in the statement of facts. It says, they argue that because the retail spaces are small, they're hard to rent, and that the dance theater company teaches dance to 2 to 18-year-olds, and that it's licensed by the Board of Ed. So maybe there's a program, they didn't make a link, but maybe there's a programmatic need to expand. I went on the studio's website. It's not a not-for-profit, and in fact, it teaches dance for 2 to 80-year-olds, so it's not specifically a children's program. I'm glad to see that, but it's not falling within what we think of as a school somehow. So I think that they need to dig deeper into the argument that was based on the original grant was based on. That argument was for the difficulty in economics of not being able to rent the cellar space, which was originally designed to be used as a bowling alley, and when the bowling alley closed, there was no viable rental in a cellar because there's no windows, there's no direct access. Who else but a dance studio or a gym would actually use the cellar? So And now it seems that both of those things need to expand as they did previously, because there were other grants to expand to expand the gym. So I think it needs to tie back to the original argument, which they didn't do at all. Also, I note the CO, once again, was a condition to grant and has been since 2006. We need explanation for what's holding it up. There's no excuse anymore. And, there are issues about safety when you don't have a valid C of O. I also note that the cellar dance studio is not accessible. I don't understand how that was permitted. I know it's been around for 30 years without permits prior to the BSA grant, but I actually don't understand how they get away with that in terms of ADA requirements. I'd like them to also verify that the spaces are fully sprinklers, that there's a second means of egress from the cellar, that the illegal billboards were removed from the building that was noted in a prior approval, and that the signs comply with C1 zoning.
Also, just give us a breakdown on what they're doing about the violations, where they are. I know they had some ENSEL system violations in the building, and they said that they could get those cleared, because I guess that tenant has moved out, but I'd like to see some progress to make sure that at least their fire safety for the building is being taken care of. And I don't think that they elaborated on whether they need to get a public assembly permit, which I think they do, so they should discuss how that's going to factor into getting their CO, and if they comply with ADA and everything else that you need to get a PA.
Right. They need a PA permit. You think the studio downstairs fits more than 75 people?
Yeah.
Is that it? Oh, I don't even think they have two means of egress down there.
Yeah.
Yeah, okay. Anyone else? Yeah?
Appeals calendar, decision items, one number 6, 15314A, 200 Cambridge Avenue, Staten Island.
Okay, on March 6th, the applicant responded to the DOT's request for additional information concerning vehicle trips, including buses. They also provided a plan showing the turning radii for the buses as was requested. However, as far as I know, but I
Haven't
think that we're
received
going to
anything.
call and beg all day today, and maybe we can do this by
Absolutely.
email. We still don't have a letter or email from DOT stating that that portion of Cambridge is not contemplated on the DOT's plan. But we will vote this as soon as we have it, and we will beg today to get it, because we understand that it's not a good reason to hold up the applicant any longer. Okay, and apologies.
Continued hearing items, item number 7, 300-08A, 3935 27th Street, Queens.
So this is kind of more of an ongoing progress check with this applicant, because I think that we need to stay on top of them to make sure that they're moving ahead to proceed to make the site safe, to repair the damage to neighbors, and verify that the work in place can remain, since it was likely installed using substandard materials and methods. They provided site safety plan drawings showing the netting, protection of adjoining rooftops, and sidewalk bridge installations. But as far as I can tell, these haven't been approved yet by DOB. There's a letter from the applicant that states that the elevator, which was a concern in terms of the elevator that's located in the M12R5B Dutch Kill Special Subdistrict, is too high for the site, for that portion. There's a letter from Marvin Mitzner that says that it's a bulkhead. I don't know how an elevator is a bulkhead when it has a stop. It's only a bulkhead when it's the overrun. So that can't be what it is. I think the biggest problem is because the drawings are very unclear. They actually don't show in the zoning analysis the elevator. So you can't tell whether it's penetrating the sky exposure plane, or because it's an M12, so it doesn't have, it's sky exposure plane. So that would clear up everything if we could just get a zoning analysis showing that. We also need updates on on things that were discussed at the last hearing, such as site inspections, materials testing, and correction of damage to adjoining properties. We got a letter from one neighbor whose property was severely damaged, and I can't tell whether there's been really any progress made on actually working on her site based on that. So, any other comments?
No, I think you touched on my concern. I'm going to be a dog with a bone still, and I just had issues with the height of that elevator. I understand that they're saying that the elevator services the terraces, and that portion, I suppose DOB would say that portion that is above the terrace could be called a bulkhead. But I agree, I don't think that I think a bulkhead is above the elevator. It's the elevator overrun, it's, all of the machinery, et cetera. So I had questions about that, and then I also sort of had questions about that then you have access to the BSA building from the elevator. And I see that, I think in another iteration, they actually had sort of this direct access, but now you kind of have to go onto the terrace and then come around and go through a door. And I'm wondering if that actually really makes a difference, that if this elevator is actually servicing the other building. And I think then you might have questions of whether or not the floor area could be attributed. I don't know.
Well, it's sitting on the other side of the boundary line, so I don't know how you get to transfer the floor area
True,
across.
but I'm wondering if they go over on floor area for the other portion, right? I don't know if that would be considered floor area of that elevator, once it has a direct connection.
Well, there's no question that it's one building. There's no means of egress from
Yeah,
that extension.
It operates as one building.
Yes, so. Okay. Anything else?
New cases, item number 8, 16714A, 250 Manhattan Avenue, Manhattan.
Okay, this is a vested rights case. I think they submitted a lot of material showing that there was in place by the date of July 29th, 09, which was the date of the zoning text change, that there was a first floor slab in place, perimeter first floor masonry nearly complete, steel columns and one beam at the first floor. That's shown in a photo taken in August, so it gives you an idea that that was probably close. An earlier photo taken sometime in January of 09 shows a finished first floor slab in place with openings to the cellar for elevator and stairs, so I see that as indication that, of course, the foundations were in place, so it seems like it would have been a normal vesting. Not really sure, and I guess it's just because they didn't proceed that they actually have to come here, but otherwise DOB would have recognized the vesting at that time. I'm just curious because they provide a lot of data that gets you up to February 09, but I don't see any work that was completed between February and July 09. Maybe there wasn't, maybe there was just kind of a stop. The statement of facts only discusses non-compliance with the R6B residential and community and commercial floor community facility floor area. But what about, commercial floor area. But there are other bulk regulations that it also wouldn't comply with for the rear yard, for example, height, for example. It's wouldn't be a permitted obstruction in the rear yard. So they should add those other non-compliances. The statement of facts and the construction data states that 0% of the foundation slab to cellar was complete as of July 29th, 09. I don't understand that statement because the photo that's dated January 23rd, 09 shows the first floor slab in place. So that's confusing, and that statement appears 2 times in the submission, once in the statement of facts and then another in the kind of official listing of all work in place. I think it's a mistake, but maybe it's missing a 0 and a 1. but I don't know. With respect to the 152,000 spent in hard costs listed, it sounds like most of these are site prep, fence, plumbing, demo. So I was a little confused about that, why that would be considered part of the hardship. And then they make a statement that in terms of loss, of economic loss, there would be $1 million in lost sale value for the commercial condo, which I don't know there would have been a condo sale in such a location, but based on $400 a square foot, and I don't understand where that number comes from. It's not supported at all. The sales projection chart also shows that there's 2,800 square feet of commercial space, but the plans only show 1,870 square feet. There may be an error since there's an interior stairway goes to a cellar labeled residential storage of 801 square feet. Maybe it meant to be labeled commercial storage, and that would account for some of the distance in the numbers, but not be the same numbers. And then my other question, which I don't know that they're addressing here, and they need to, is does the current building as designed comply with 2008/2014 building code? I seriously doubt it because it was permitted in 2008. So I think July 2009 was the window when you had to comply.
Possibly, but they
Yeah.
may
Right.
have anticipated that, but we should ask the question.
Nobody ever designed stuff to meet 2008 code if they didn't have to. It's more expensive.
I'm giving the benefit of the doubt.
So if that's the case, then there's further vesting that's needed and the application isn't complete. Any other comments?
No, I agree with you on your serious loss comments. They gave us a spreadsheet that basically talks about the full market value of what is there. However, they're all based on some sort of assumption. They don't give us any backup to that spreadsheet. There are no comparables that were used to derive these selling prices. So they really need to go back to the drawing board and provide a narrative that ties all of this together, walk us through their assumptions so that we can review them and determine whether or not they're accurate. They also need to add into it whether or not any part of that structure would be reusable or whether any of it has to be demoed because of the new zoning, and then they can add that into the loss as well.
Anybody else?
Zoning calendar decision items, item number 9, 8112BZ, 980105 Metropolitan Avenue, Queens.
Okay, we will need, well, first I'll go through what they provided. They provided photos that the signage that we requested has been, 2 of the signs that we requested have been installed, and there's an owner affidavit saying, that there's the missing signage is on order because it's custom and will be installed in June. That's a pretty long lead item for a sign, but okay. Also, there's photos showing the sign brackets were removed as requested. And there's also a cut sheet of cedar planters, which I thought was kind of an interesting solution, though requires a lot of work, that will be used at night to block off the parking spots that are adjacent to the residences at night. But that's really a good way of reducing the noise and disturbance to residences. And they revised the plans to show all the conditions. The plans were extremely clear and called out everything. It was really a pleasure to see such plans. So kudos to the architect, thank you. And then we will need to open this tomorrow to receive a short form EAS that needs to be corrected, and then we can close and then we can vote on this. Okay, anybody else?
Item number 10, 6513BZ, 123 Franklin Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay, with this, we also need to open it to accept the submission of a restrictive declaration for archaeological review, and then we can close and vote.
Item number 11, 32113BZ, 37-1900 4th Street, Queens.
Sorry, one second. I think that we didn't have any submission requirements for this, so I'm fine with it, right? Anybody else?
Except they made this comment about the wood capping on the chain link slats, which I did not understand. I thought they were going to be PVC caps, but it looks okay.
Right, okay.
Item number,
Yeah, how do you do a wood cap? You can't. Okay. Anyway, that would be something, but we're good, okay. Sorry, go ahead.
Item number 12, 2814 BC, 3540 Nostrand Avenue, Brooklyn.
Okay, I think also,
that's-
sorry.
That's the one I mean with the wood capping.
Oh, yeah, that's what I was, yeah, that's one, right.
Sorry.
Because they also provided, I was happy to see rhododendrons and azaleas instead of dahlias. Because the rhododendrons and azaleas are perennials, unlike the dahlias. Okay, and with this one, it will be conditioned on the fence and plantings being maintained and replaced as necessary, trash pickup 6 times a week, and bi-monthly extermination, and inspection and treatment for rodents. Okay, anyone else?
Item number 13, 14614 BZ, 285 Grand Street, Manhattan.
Okay. With this one, there was a submission, sort of the understanding at the hearing was that if we could close, if the submission was satisfactory, then we could vote this out. And so I was hoping that the submission answered all the questions, but it was actually, I thought, weak. So there was, the issue is this is a CrossFit gym, so we're on high alert, because not only are we working on one right now that's going through a very, very long hearing process of months because of the noise and vibration issues, but we've received complaints about other CrossFit gyms, and I've been paying attention to CrossFit gyms in general on the strange CrossFit blogosphere, and the issue of vibration and noise is enormous simply because this particular gym type decides that its patrons should be allowed to drop 185-pound weights from above their heads to the ground simultaneously. So we asked, because this site, though, in the cellar and has a restaurant above, which is a very noisy use, which is probably the only compatible use I would think of with a CrossFit gym, because all the clanking of plates and music and people speaking loudly probably covers up the effect of 185 pounds being dropped simultaneously by 10 students. But there is a not-for-profit cultural institution that is going to be opening next door, and we asked specifically what would be the effect on the party wall or the adjoining wall with these repeated drops. And the engineer who submitted a letter submitted the kind of letter that I might have submitted if I didn't want to be committal about something, which said that the use of weights, listing things like kettle weights, which are really little, would not affect the building's structural integrity. That was not the question. The question was whether repeated dropping of 185-pound weights in concert with several weight droppers would or could affect structural integrity of the subject building or the neighboring property. So since the main question wasn't answered, I don't feel like we need to reopen this if we closed it, and we need some real answers. Also, the plans were revised, but there was no additional information provided about the noise attenuation systems that we also asked for. We wanted details about what the existing conditions are in case they need to be beefed up. Also, there's notes on the drawings that say fire safety equipment will be installed, but this is occupied, so it has to have been installed. And if it hasn't been installed, then it needs to be installed before we can grant. And so they need to submit proof that the fire safety systems are installed. And with respect, there's a note that says the space will be sprinklered if the fire department requires it. Then we need to find out now whether the fire department requires it if it's not already sprinklered, because it's an occupied space in the cellar. I mean, you have to get out of a cellar. They did, however, on the drawings clarify that there's floor area for the first floor lobby that's devoted to the gym, and also elevator access to the cellar. So, yeah, so I want to reopen this and hope that the applicant can submit responses very quickly if they want to get this cleared up. Anyone else?
Item number 14, 17514BZ, 1162 Broadway, Manhattan.
Okay, so they revised the financials to correct the gross built area of the as of right, excluding the cellar, to 24,740 square feet, and so on and so on. Okay. They clarified that the cellar retail space income is 50% of the ground floor, that the restaurant is independent from the hotel, so, oops, I'm sorry, I'm in the wrong date. Sorry, I'm reading about old stuff. Apologies. 333. Okay, it's much less than that. We received a corrected C of A, and we also received a letter describing the future development scenarios of the adjoining lots and how they would affect the side yard setback at the project, which was really the only open question. So having received all that, I think we're good. Sorry about that ramble just before.
Continued hearing items. Item number 15, 350-12BZ, 5-32nd Street, Brooklyn.
Sorry, so this one, they requested an adjournment, which we can adjourn till next week, actually, because we already have a submission.
Item number 16, 30913BZ, 965 East 24th Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, they provided new plans that were marked revised, but other than a reduction in the peak height from 36'8" to 35'8", I see no other changes to the drawings in response to our comments. With respect to the side yard, I'm not really understanding why the reduction in the side yard to 8 feet for the bay window, because that increases the non-compliance with respect to the total side yards of 13 feet, since reducing it to 8 feet plus the existing 4 is only 12. And I really think it should stay within the 9 feet unless they can demonstrate that a bay window is a permitted obstruction in a side yard. I don't really get moving that whole thing out to the bay window point as the new line for the side yard, because it's just a bay window. The plan, they did provide, as we requested, plans with interior dimensions. That's necessary to understand how the plan would be affected by our changes, our requested changes, whether there's room. The photo streetscape shows predominant house types on the block are 2 stories with dormered attic types. Only 3 houses have an FAR of 0.98 or 1, so that is not the neighborhood character. This streetscape drawing, as opposed to the photo streetscape, shows the house is taller than the neighbors. And we did ask them to provide an axonometric of the house to better understand the massing. The reason for the axon, or if you're able to muster a rendering, I'm seeing a crowd of very challenged architects coming before the board, where renderings, 3D drawings are part of an architectural education, so I'm not really getting why this is so hard. But it helps us understand better. It helps you make your argument if you provide those 3D drawings. With respect to the massing, I do want to note that Section 23661 requires that 30 feet above the side yard and the rear yard, the building has to set back 1/2 of the height by which the building exceeds 30 feet. This is meant to be measured above complying side and rear yards, not non-complying ones. So the setbacks that are shown are not in compliance with that. So when we talk about the building being massive and overwhelming the neighbors, it's because the zoning expected that first you set back away from the side yard and then you move up, then you angle up. And in this case, the side yards are pushed out and then they're using the same formula. So that's why the houses seem so massive with respect to their lots. And that's, for me, one reason why the massing needs to be modified to be more in line with the intention of the zoning. In this case, the attic is too high. The storage at the rear doesn't need to have such high ceilings. And that it's kind of easy to inform yourself about what the mass of the house would be like by using the massing of the adjacent houses. I mean, it's not to say that it's identical to the massing of the adjacent houses, but if you don't inform with them, then you're kind of off in this place that's really inappropriate to the neighborhood. With respect to the rear yard diagram, it's clear that the properties immediately adjacent to the site have 25 and 29-foot rear yards. This house already has a 25-foot rear yard. Garage incursions are only 1 story, but the proposal is 3 stories, and no photos were provided of the rear yard conditions as requested. So we still have work to do on this one. Any other comments?
I think you've touched everything I wanted to say. I'm concerned about the rear,
Yeah.
that attic is 7'11", and I'm not sure why it really needs to be that, coupled with a 12-foot 6-inch ceiling height in the master bedroom makes for a really large space back there. They could conceivably bring that down.
Right.
And they even have a stairway up to the attic
They do,
storage, which,
yeah.
and the roof is higher at that point, in the rear.
In the
which
rear,
is-
so it pops it up, so it's even more of an imposition on the
It's
rear,
kind of
yeah.
unusual.
It's clearly being driven by the cathedral ceiling in the master bedroom.
And, that's okay, but not at the expense of the rear yard. Stay at your 25 feet, have all the cathedral you want.
Right.
Okay.
Item number 17, 8-14BZ, 1824 East 22nd Street, Brooklyn.
We were asked to adjourn this to April 28th.
Item number 18, 60-14BZ, 14141 72nd Avenue, Queens.
And we were asked to adjourn this to May 19th.
Item number 19, 6414BZ, 1320 East 23rd Street, Brooklyn.
And again, a request to adjourn to April 28th.
Item number 20, 9414BZ, 1150 East 22nd Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, this one was, is again a house that's been in review for a while, but I think that the submission was a lot clearer this time in making various kinds of arguments for compatibility. The statement of fact says that the proposed enlargement, which is 5'6" higher than its neighbor, will still be lower than 33% of the existing homes on the west side of East 22nd Street between Avenues J and K, and 6 of the 16 homes on the west side exceed 35 6 inches, and that the roof lines and pitches are similar to 8 of those 16. Drawing P14, I note that drawing P14, which is a streetscape, shows lots 73, 75 at 37 feet, lot 71 at 35 feet, lot 1 at 36'6", lots 67, 65 at 39, and lot 57 at 39. So I am seeing that there's a lot to draw from in terms of that height. So it's not like it's an anomaly, which most of our applications have been anomalies drawing on something that's going on 4 blocks away. This does seem to be, in terms of height, the character. With respect to the mass of the shed dormer, it's a little bit, there's some confusion there for me. The section on drawing P8 is noted, as was pointed out in the statement of facts. And I understand that the mass beyond that is the stair tower roof. But there seems to be a disconnect in the drawings between the section on P8 shows the stair tower in elevation behind. And there's a side elevation of the house, and then there's the plan. And they actually don't seem to meet. For example, the peak of the tower in the main elevation is lower, and on the plan is lower than the peak that's shown on that side elevation, the one that shows the stair tower from the side. And that's the one that actually makes the house look awkward. It's where the peak is, the peaks are matching, and it makes that thing sort of look too big. So I think with that correction, then I get it better, that it's subservient to the peak and isn't kind of overwhelming it. However, with respect to the rear yard, there first of all is no proof that the rear addition was built pursuant to permits. So the reduction is actually from a required 30-foot yard to a 20-foot yard. That's the request. That reduction would only be appropriate where adjoining rear yards are of similar depths. Here, the adjoining properties have one-story extensions and one-story garages in the rear yards. That makes a good argument for a one-story extension and a one-story garage in this rear yard, but I'm not finding support for a three-story structure that reduces the yard depth to 20 feet. When I look at the plan, I see that there's room for adjustment to stay within this existing 24-foot line or extend only at the first floor to the 20 feet. So that, and I don't know whether it's worth doing that little 4-foot bump out, but I just don't see an argument in the rear for reducing. Whether or not the neighbor signs a letter, people don't understand architecture till it's built. So a neighbor saying, sure, fine, I'm your friend and you'll do the same for me someday, will have a rude awakening when construction starts and realizes that he's feeling hemmed in. Okay, so that's, anybody else? Okay.
Okey-doke. Item number 21, 14814BZ, 11th Avenue A, Manhattan.
This one we were asked to adjourn till April 28th.
Item number 22, 18614A, 51-63 Bond Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, this is kind of a big one. Okay, so the plans were revised to provide 20-foot setbacks along the property lines, which represent the required rear yards, because it's basically this sort of like the side yard of this hotel meets the rear yard. So it's so these are 20-foot setbacks. But in fact, though there was, and I saw that on BIS, they have already put their official zoning diagram. What they did is they copied that zoning diagram onto our drawings and hoped that that would be adequate to explain to us where the zoning compliances and non-compliances are. And it doesn't really work like that. So it's very difficult to see what are the yard condition, what are the yard requirements, what are the height and setback requirements. They really need to show that on the plans and the elevations. That's kind of standard, and they didn't do that. So it's hard. It's really hard to understand what the scope of our request, the request is, and to make sure. And by the way, to check that they're right because they missed a rear yard on the last submission. Yeah, so for instance, they didn't show that in the C61 there's a maximum base height of 150 feet within 100 feet of a wide street or 125 feet beyond in a narrow street. I had to look that up since it wasn't in the submission. They did provide a chart showing floor area for each use in each scenario as well as guest room size charts, which we requested. And they did relocate the main entry from Bond to Skirmerhorn as was requested, but the drawings and their sort of designation of doors and windows and sliding doors is extremely unclear. So it kind of looks like there's a door from Bond into the lobby bar. or it's sort of a very strange condition. And I don't think that's what the neighbors had in mind, and I don't think it's appropriate that there should be an entrance to a lobby bar from Bond. You already have one from Skirmerhorn, so if it's there, should take it out. There's also a missing door, unless it's some kind of special door, to the retail on Bond Street. So, and then I note with respect to sort of the financial analysis and the plan, that the size of the retail spaces are minuscule. They're like 250 square feet and things like that. It's like newsstand sizes. So I'm not really understanding what the financial model is for having these teeny retail spaces. And I note also that some back of house spaces are also right against the street wall on Skirmerhorn, where you would think it's the last place on earth you would want a back of house space. Because since this is developing into ultimately what will be a thriving commercial center, you'd want all your retail right there on Skirmerhorn. We did ask, so what they did provide was proposed with the event space as shown on the second floor, and then a no ballrooms solution where they just take out the ballroom. But what we actually asked them to do was to look at moving the ballroom to the roof. And rather than do that, they provided one floor plan showing increased elevator bank, and therefore that's the reason why they can't have the ballroom on the roof. That I find kind of, well, for one, it's not a descriptive response. You should actually do the drawings that shows the ballroom on the roof, shows how you would infill all the hotel rooms, show how the thing would be laid out. The reason for asking about relocating the ballroom for the roof was because there seems to be a lot of expense related to carrying the upper 9 floors over this ballroom. And so either you take out the costs of that structure from your hardship and say, this is something we select to do because we prefer the ballroom to be on the second floor for whatever kind of practical reasons, or you move it to the roof and show us why the whole thing doesn't work. And I'm just not seeing that. For example, under the current proposal, there's one elevator that goes to the ballroom. On the modified one, it shows 2 dedicated elevators to the ballroom. I'm not understanding why all of a sudden now it needs 2 elevators, especially because they leave the meeting rooms on the second floor. I also don't understand that. It seems to me you would make the entire public space on the roof, which, by the way, would give you access to exterior space that maybe could be buffered from the neighbors. So now there's no exterior space. Because, by the way, that roof will be off limits to neighbors on the second floor. So I just don't think the case was made at all for why that ballroom can't be relocated. So one option might be to just say, okay, we're going to take out all the structural expense, and that way we have a modified financial analysis with respect to that. But I'm also looking at the cost estimate for the no ballroom that shows construction difference from removing the ballroom represents a savings of only $2 million, though the building is 1 story shorter, so fewer bathrooms, fewer exterior wall, less structure, less elevator, all that stuff. How could that only be $2 million? Not to mention the structure for the ballroom, which is this major piece of concrete, and as described by one of the engineers. Yeah. And then the other is, why did the ratios for income change between the proposed and the no ballroom? Why did room income change if the key count and the occupancy rate is the same? I know they say that without a ballroom, you have to charge less. But there are many, many hotels in the city that don't have ballrooms. This one has a restaurant, this one has meeting rooms. I'm not really understanding the justification for reducing the income so much, or even at all. If anything, You could argue the occupancy rates might change without a ballroom, because ballrooms sort of guarantee that the guests will stay at this hotel. And also, it wasn't clear to me where the line item for the ballroom was. Is it in other expenses? And why is it in other expenses? If we keep focusing on the ballroom, there should be a line item that says, this is the income for the meeting rooms in the ballroom, and this is how it's generated. And then the main request here is, the request here is for a lot of floor area. It's a very large 2 FAR increase, right? So I'm looking at how to reduce the amount of requested floor area, and I look actually at the inefficiency of the planning. Like, why can't the meeting rooms and the ballroom go to the top floor and the back of house and the admin go to the first floor? Or why is there so much admin and back of house on the third floor? So to support that, I'd like to know what is the projected number of office staff. I've been in, like, the James Hotel, their back of house literally is one sad room in the basement where all of the staff go. And this still, and the cellar is much smaller than this cellar, because the James is a very small floor plate. So, and they actually have no offices on any other floors. So that's a Manhattan thriving Tribeca hotel. Why, or Soho? Why can they do it with just that little room and like the 5 managers all sitting closely together? Why do you need to spread out into so many rooms? And then I also, in terms of the planning, there's this square winding stair at the center in both schemes that I understand first takes you from the first floor to the second floor ballroom. That I get. But why does it go to the third floor? And I think also the fourth floor. For one, I don't think a winding stair is a legal means of egress. And for two, what's it connecting to? And in the no ballroom solution, it doesn't have any purpose. So that should be taken out. If that were taken out, then there'd be room for different rooms. And then there's, in the no ballroom scenario, because it was kind of quickly done, there's this large pre-function hallway for just 2 meeting rooms. That makes no sense. Like, why would you need such a gigantic hallway for 2 meeting rooms? It's just because the plan was kind of quickly assembled for that. So it needs to be more reasonably studied. And so I would say you should look at reducing with better efficiencies to 12 floors instead of 13. Also, the floor area schedules are incorrect on the drawings, though they may be correct on individual drawings when they're totaled up. It's not correct. So, for example, on the first floor, it's 17,000 square feet with no ballroom and 16,900 square feet with the proposed, while there's no difference in the plan. It's 17,227. And the third floor of the proposed is 8,100 square feet, and in the no ballroom, it's 7,100 square feet, where a double height space has been infilled. So none of those numbers are right. They did eliminate the access to the roof setback at the second floor, and there needs to be a note on the drawings that it's not to be used for party guests. It's only for maintenance. They did provide structural drawings to show the depth to the roof tunnel, to the tunnel of the roof. Sorry, the roof of the tunnel. And then there's this very elaborate study by Urban Cartographics about the subway system, and it's an extremely interesting study because it teaches you about all the times that the train passes underneath and so on. But for me, it doesn't really show, it doesn't really tell the story about this site very well. And it doesn't tie into, I think its intention was to say there are other sites that have construction on them. And though there's tunnels running underneath those sites are not as encumbered as this site because the tunnel is deeper. But the submission doesn't actually show you that this is the site on which X construction was done. which didn't need a variance. So it's more about guessing around. I had to look at another source to figure out where 333 Schermerhorn was located and say, that's the place where the tunnel is doing this bypass. So it's actually this great historical study that just confused me, frankly. It should show, also there are, let's see, it should show where on that plan that has all of the different subway conditions the recent constructions are, the ones that are just about to be constructed are, and why specifically those sites are not encumbered, after telling a whole story about the history of the subway, which is extremely interesting, but still. And also, there's a statement, and then after being so specific and so scientific, it defers to the architect who's not involved in the discussion, who concluded that there's a 35% encumbrance on the 333 Schermerhorn site. And no idea how that's calculated, based on what, nothing. So I think what would be helpful for me is if the engineer came to this meeting, then we could, to tomorrow's hearing, and then we could ask the questions very specifically and point to the map and then really understand where the tunnel heights are and so on. And then, sorry to go on, with respect to the shadow analysis, I think there was something that was missing from at least the discussion. It's a shadow analysis in the EAS, because I believe that the 15-story project that's now under construction at 300 Schermerhorn will cast shadows on the school yard that's adjacent to the site. So, because actually, when you look at the shadow study, there's a point where it's pretty dire. It's really casting shadows on the schoolyard. But actually, it seems as if the shadows will be cast also, or maybe at different time periods, by the as-of-right project just adjacent to it also. So maybe it's mitigated. And then the LPC did flag the site for archaeological resources, though the EAS thought that it wouldn't do that. I'm not sure why. So a restrictive deck will need to be recorded against the site as a condition to approval for the excavation work. And with respect to the hazmat, the BIS shows Lot 5 is occupied by garage gas station, which may be a mistake on BIS, but it's not showing up in the historical analysis on the Phase 1. So that should be checked, because maybe it's a mistake, but maybe it's not. Any other comments?
Yeah, I had a few varied comments. If you look at the encumbered and unencumbered development costs, I just had a question concerning the superstructure concrete costs. There seems to be a premium for the facade, and I was just wondering what that premium actually entails, because the facade on both of the structural plans look the same, so I'm not sure exactly where the costs are coming in. And also, if they could clarify under the premium for the thick slabs, which slabs they're referring to, since the matte slab is actually included in the foundation costs. It looks from the plans like it might be the first floor slab that's larger, but if they could actually clarify that, that would be helpful. And then for the financials, I had just a few questions. For the retail rents, I had asked for better comparables because I felt that the space in the hotel was actually premium space, and the comparables, the photos actually showed spaces in older buildings, and I'm not satisfied with the response that I got. I really think that they need to focus in on retail space that are in, first-rate buildings, newer buildings, because the space in this hotel is going to be 17 feet floor-to-ceiling heights. It's going to be really grade A space, and the comparables that they're showing are all first-floor spaces in old buildings, many of them tenement buildings with low floor-to-ceiling heights. And even if they build out the space nicely, it's still not the same sort of space that's going to be in this hotel. So I think they really should look at spaces in newer buildings, newly constructed buildings, or spaces in a couple of the hotels like that they actually use in their SDR report, like the Brooklyn Marriott and the new space next door to the Brooklyn Marriott, which I think is their extended space where they have a restaurant and other things. And as to the ballroom versus no ballroom scenarios, I had asked them to take the ballroom out, figuring that that would reduce costs, and see whether or not it would be feasible to actually have a hotel without a ballroom, and they showed through the financials that that wouldn't work. Although the construction costs were lower because the hotel is 1 story less, and they also don't have those support beams that go across that ballroom space supporting the upper floors. They also reduced the projected income, and the result, would you capitalize that lower income, it's just not enough of a market value to overcome the construction costs. However, I have a problem with this, and I really think there should be more information given to us, because it seems to me that that assumption is based on a number of different assumptions about the income and occupancy rate of the hotels based on an STR report that is using comparables that are not even like this hotel. The financial expert actually acknowledges that the STR report is based on 7 hotels, many of which are not like this hotel, and that it does not have the extensive ballroom or meeting room space. And when I looked on the internet, out of those 7 hotels, only 2 hotels have ballrooms and extensive meeting space. The other 5 hotels have 1 or 2 meeting rooms in each hotel, and some of them really only have hotel rooms that are devoted to meeting. Very small spaces, not at all the same. Now, they acknowledge that, and so when they do figure out what the average daily rate is and the occupancy rate is, they actually put an add-on for a ballroom scenario, saying that, well, if it was a hotel with a ballroom, the income should probably be higher. And then they take it off with another assumption for the no ballroom. So now you have 2 assumptions, yet the occupancy rate stays the same. I'm not sure why. And so you have a statement that this is not going to work, and that statement is based on a bunch of assumptions and projections. I think they really need to ground that in fact, and one way they could do that would be to isolate the 2 hotels that actually have ballrooms and extensive event space, focus in on that, show us what the figures are for that, and then we can see whether or not their projections are actually accurate, because I'm not convinced that they are at this point.
Anything else? You want to talk about the structure?
Regarding the cost, the comparative cost between the unencumbered and the encumbered, I had mentioned last week that I didn't think the excavation costs went down far enough. And if you compare the as-of-right unencumbered plans, the top of the cellar floor is at minus 15 feet, but the excavation only goes to minus 14 feet. So they have to go down at least another 2 to 3 feet, and that would take the foundation wall concrete to higher, maybe 20% higher, plus the excavation costs and waterproofing, all those things that are related to debt. So I think they have to revise their hardship cost. And last week we asked them about the MTA improvements, which was like $2 million plus, and that seems to have gone down significantly, and I think they've just moved it over to excavation foundation costs, and they have like a $1 million premium for foundations over the subway, but it's just an allowance. It doesn't really explain what it is. So if they could give us information on that.
Anything else?
Just a little bit more about what Commissioner Otley Brown was saying. I have trouble sort of reconciling that they actually really need the event space, considering the market in the area. As Commissioner Otley Brown stated, there are only a couple of facilities that actually have that kind of an event space. And so I'm wondering whether the figures, whether there's, I guess, a big enough pool to actually get real figures on this. So I just question, because I think perhaps they haven't thought about maybe some smaller space, or some reconfiguration of the space. And again, we talked about it being put up on the roof. It seems that they have sort of an idea of what this is supposed to be, and they haven't really stepped back from that. It's kind of like, well, it's got to be X amount of square feet, and it's this tall, and it's this big. but there seems to be no thought as to, well, maybe we can make it smaller, or we rethink the operation a bit, considering what's out there in the marketplace. So if they can discuss exactly why they need what they need, and that there's no other alternative.
Okay.
Item number 23, 324-14BZ, 19830 Jamaica Avenue, Queens.
Okay, this is actually a first hearing for this. We did have a public comment hearing, but actually nobody from the public spoke. So this is a reinstatement of an expiring variance for auto repair. And let's see. So I just had some questions. Why does the statement of facts I found quite confusing and in fact rambling. For example, it refers to parking for 5 or more motor vehicles, but then keeps saying something about 7 spaces. I didn't understand. Is it that the approval was for 5 or more spaces, which it was, but that they actually have 7? It just wasn't clear why the statement of facts kept going on and on about that. And now that we're speaking about the statement of facts, it would have been really great if the applicant had proofread it, both for sense and grammar, because it's repetitious within like a paragraph. It says the same thing 3 times. It's just, ease of reading and respect for this body that you proofread your materials before you submit them. Just in terms of some of the real information that we need. We need the days of operation. It gave us the hours, but not the days. The statement of facts says there is a basement, but I don't see how, based on the sections that were provided. It looks like slab on grade, so that should be corrected. Or if there's a basement, then the drawings are wrong. The statement of facts also says that there are 1,716 square feet in the building, but the plan of the building itself shows 1,575 square feet. I'm not really sure why that seems like this consistent difference between the building and what it says in the statement of facts. Apparently, there's no plan to enlarge this existing building. So something, I don't know what it is. The statement of facts says there are also 147 square feet of signs where 150 square feet is the maximum allowable. The plan actually shows 167 square feet. I think the mistake there is that because the regulations apply to each frontage, the plan didn't subdivide and say there's this many square feet facing this street and this many square feet stay facing this street, therefore it complies. Also, the planting areas that are shown on the site plan need to show dimensions, number, and type of planting. And then there was an attempt to establish that this has been a continuous, uninterrupted use since the lapse of the last grant. I thought it was strange that tax returns were provided, and I didn't see how actually tax returns, especially the personal ones. I can see arguably the 2008 tax returns from Jam Auto shows that Jam Auto's in business. More than that, it doesn't tell us that there's an ongoing use. But the personal returns, I'm kind of embarrassed to say, we saw the personal returns of the applicant. That doesn't really tell us anything.
Those personal returns have the rental income from the site listed in them.
But that doesn't tell you about the use. It just says that it's rented. It could be rented for a...
True, but I think that's probably why they put it there, was
Yeah.
because they didn't have anything else, so they figured just, okay, we're at least accepting rental income from it.
Right,
Was
but-
their idea.
But, utility bills, rent rolls, I'm kind of assuming that there's no checks or copied checks because maybe they were paid in cash or maybe they didn't keep copies of the checks. But there should be other kinds of records that indicate that you have a tenant, even renewed leases, things like that. It just seems like a very strange way to support that. There were other materials also supplied. kind of this disparate collection of things, which we were expected to go through. I don't know how to go through them. That's the applicant's obligation. You go through them and you say, attached is a copy of, I don't know what, the delivery bill from the dry cleaners that says, that proves that somebody was actually renting here, something, and as opposed to us figuring out what that means. So that was not helpful. But based on photos and others made site visits, so they should speak to this, the site is messy and run down and strewn with trash and graffiti. There are banners on the chain link fence that need to be removed. And the site is adjacent to and across the street from residential uses, so it must be properly screened from them with planting and fencing. There should be planting shown on the drawings along the 199th Street frontage, which is right opposite residential uses, and it should be dense kind of shrubs to conceal that. Any other comments?
I had questions about, they need 8 spaces for car sales, and they've put it sort of right up front, and they don't really discuss how the change in the site plan, it sort of reacts with the street. And so I'm sort of concerned about how you've got people coming in for service, and I guess he's got 5 spots for them, and then he's got all of these, 8 spots in front. He doesn't really discuss how the operation, on the daily operation of that site works. That's a lot of cars to put up front on a sidewalk. So if they could discuss, how those cars come in and out, how do people come on to the site if you're going to buy a car, what kinds of cars are these? These can't be junked cars, that sort of thing. So, and do they need 8 spaces? They don't really discuss that. They just say, this is what our increase is. But what about their business plan says they need those 8 spaces?
Right, it'd be great if they can give us details, because many times service stations just want the ability to sell 1 or 2 cars here or there if they can't get the bill paid and the car is abandoned. So we don't know if it's that sort of a situation or if they are starting a bona fide car rental business where they're going to have a steady stock of 8 cars all the time. So it'd be helpful if they gave us that information. They should also give us information about how many days they're open. It gave us the hours, but it didn't say how many days a week.
Right.
And then it says that they're working 2 shifts a day, but it's only 8 to 5, which didn't make any sense. And the 2008 lease actually includes the sale of used cars, so I assume they've been doing it since 2008. And yes, the fencing and the area adjacent to 199th Street is subpar.
Very much so.
They said they were going to paint it. Is it in bad, it needs to be replaced?
Well, the yellow is extremely
Yes,
visually
jarring.
intrusive, but I think they said they were going to
Paint it
silver, and
metallic.
I'm not really sure that's going to be much better. I think some of the fencing needs to be replaced, and I was almost thinking that maybe black would be a better color for the fencing instead of like a shiny silver or something. I don't know. But
Or
if
even
the fencing's not in good condition, it should be replaced.
Exactly, it should be replaced, and then you wouldn't need to worry about painting.
Right.
Well, that's the entirety of the perimeter. Does the entirety need to be replaced?
Well, it's hard to tell now. I guess you have to sort of get up close to it and walk around the perimeter. But it's difficult to tell from a distance. But perhaps they can come back to us with, an analysis of exactly what that is
And I think the
where they
site
have
to the
replace
rear
it.
is extremely overgrown. It's not their site, but the one to the rear is very, very overgrown, so it
But it's not
adds to
their
the fact
site.
that it looks unkempt.
Yes, okay.
It looks pretty dingy.
It clearly, it looks like it's a blight on the neighborhood, to be honest with you.
Yes.
Having gone to a site visit, it's really in poor condition, and as Commissioner Montanez says, the jarring color of the paint is just
horrible. Yeah.
does nothing for it.
I don't neighborhood. That's never good.
No
Okay.
blights.
Okay, so consistent with how we've been treating these other kinds of renewals, we're going to want to clean the site before we consider an approval. It's our only opportunity to bring the site into compliance. So the property owner needs to be ready with work crew. Okay.
New cases, item number 1, 32213BZ, 4201 Main Street, Queens.
Okay, this one I note that the community board approved it, requesting that a 5-year term limit be imposed due to outstanding violations, and that the applicant amended their application to conform with that. So this is about a renewal of a variance that had parking in the R6 portion of the zoning lot. I see that the drawings that were originally approved with the application are kind of make it difficult to really understand exactly how many spaces were in the R6 portion, but the statement of facts doesn't even make an attempt to tell you. So it could say, between 43 and 39 spaces, because it's on the diagonal, but it doesn't even bother to do that. So I did find on the plans where the architect actually ventured this, said that the original approval was for 63 spaces in the R6 and 8 in the C12. So since the architect is the one who's coming up with these numbers, at least the statement of facts should incorporate that. And the proposal is for the same 63 in the R6, and they're going to increase the 14 in the C12 and add 10 off-site on lot 77. I note that there's this sort of interesting history about the zoning lot where it was merged, and then there was an oops, and it was unmerged, and there was a statement in the statement of facts about there had been an alteration application filed but disapproved or revoked or something. It needs to really be pulled, right? Because that's the whole thing. The zoning lot is formed at the moment when an application is actually, I think it's an application for permit is filed, right? So you need to pull that, and we need to be clear that nobody's using any floor area next door, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, so the answer is yes, show us that it has been removed. So there are all kinds of violations on this site, like it's almost astonishing. That's been going on since 2000. There are violations for boilers, elevator, occupancy, illegal occupancy as a restaurant without permits, failure to obtain a public assembly permit for an occupancy of 400 people, even a violation of closure order for that occupancy. These need to be addressed now. That's my phone, sorry. These need to be addressed now. The parking has absolutely nothing to do with compliance with life safety measures. And since this has been going on since 2000, there's no reason why we should believe these violations will be addressed once the BSA grant. So once again, all of this needs to be cleared up before we will consider a grant. We need information. It seems like it's all based on the restaurant, who seems to be the applicant here. So it's in your hands. Statement of facts is very unclear about the occupancies that were in place at the time of the BSA grant and the current unpermitted occupancies. It was more like figuring it out. It felt like Sherlock Holmes. Let's see, is it a restaurant? Is it a store? Oh, look at Google Maps. That's how you find out what's going on now, kind of. The 1990 C of O shows stores and eating and drinking at the first floor and offices at the second floor with no mention of parking. So I don't understand what that C of O was like, which was a condition to grant. And it's unclear and there's nothing provided anywhere that tells us what the parking requirements are for either the prior uses or the current unpermitted uses. That needs to be provided. It just says we're going to add something like 3,000 square feet of, 4,000 square feet of floor area, even though we already did. And that has X number of parking spaces required, and we'll provide those off-site on lot 77. But it doesn't tell you at all what the parking requirements are. There's also, I note on the plan, those valet parking has cars literally packed up, like lined up in a checkerboard. And I just am not sure how that operation really works. So does that mean in order to get these cars out, they're all pulled out onto the street and temporarily parked? I mean, what is the operation of this really charged parking lot? From the photos, again, the parking area is unsightly with rusted gates and graffiti, and it's also adjacent to residential buildings, so there should be screening and planting to shield the views. And then the only proof of continuous use is an affidavit from the restaurant owner, who, if he was occupying legally, would only have had one of the spaces on the first floor, and there's lots of other commercial spaces, right? So shouldn't that information be coming from the landlord? It seems like the applicant is actually the restaurant. And the landlord should have copies of rent rolls or something to show that there's been a need for the parking. And it's actually not the commercial space that we have to look at, it's the parking area. Has it been in continuous use as a parking area? I'm not really sure how they established that except with photographs.
I think maybe Sanborn maybe might show the yard. Sometimes it'll say parking across it in the back and also photos. But I thought it was very interesting that they would give us an affidavit that says, I'm affiliated with the restaurant for 4 years, yet I know there's been parking since 1990.
Right.
Right.
And that's the only thing that they give us.
Right. And so, with that other application, we got her personal tax returns. At least there was an effort to,
Right.
with documentation, to really show something. Here, there's no effort. And by the way, this is the same owner who builds stuff illegally and doesn't bring things to code, et cetera, et cetera. Anything else?
Yes. I have concerns about the illegally built portion of the building, and to make sure that we're sort of capturing everything that was illegally built. So I think we need to know a little bit more about how that happened and exactly what was built, and give us some comfort that there weren't other things that are built that have just been sort of left out of the narrative. They also talk about the valet parking is available from 10 a.m. to 4 p.m., and I'm wondering what happens after 4 p.m. when most people probably are going to a restaurant. It seems sort of odd. So I'd like them to elaborate on that operation. I think that, and again, I agree that an affidavit from someone who's only been there for a few years can only speak to, I guess it was from 2001, they can't speak to what was happening. So if they have a lease that says, included in this lease are, 10 spaces located
Right.
in, the adjacent lot or something like that, that would be very helpful.
In addition to them doing a parking analysis, including the change of use from the prior approval, I think they should do the same thing for loading berths due to the increase in the size of the building.
Mm-hmm.
And I think they should give us more information. They said the signage is in compliance, but you look at the photos, there's like all these businesses and tons of signs on
There's
two
a lot of
stores,
signage
two
on the
stories. They could do a more detailed analysis of signage compliance.
Okay. Good. Thank you.
Item number 2, 5114 BC, 1369 East 28th Street, Brooklyn.
Okay, so again, this is a 73-622 to enlarge an existing home. Note, the existing house exceeds the allowable FAR side yards and open space ratio. We need support for these being legal, non-complying structures, because if they're not, you can't use that as your base. The discussion of the rear yard in the statement of facts is completely inadequate and doesn't mention that the rear lot line of this site backs up to the rear lot line of a school play yard. The extension will have a big impact on adjacent neighbors who have very deep rear yards. The floor plan would allow trimming of 5 feet from the rear while maintaining all the desired uses. The extent of the enlargement is great, at 68% more than the existing. There was no photo streetscape provided, which is our standard. The only streetscape provided shows smaller houses than the existing here. It just has the two houses one on either side. And I don't see the justification to reduce the side yard to 3 feet from 4 feet. There's only a bay window, so similar to the other one. There's only a bay window that protrudes into the side yard to reduce just at the bay window to 3 feet. The rest of the length of that side yard is 4 feet. And in addition, the proposal is to reduce the side yard to 3 feet and then have bay windows that extend into that reduced side yard. I just don't see the justification for that, nor our authority for that. The statement of fact says this is a prefab construction. At least it says it once. The drawings don't seem to indicate that this is prefab construction. I don't even see it as being prefab where, it's one of those kind of frame prefab stories. It's too odd of a shape. But at the same time, I do see that they're removing the entirety of the house above the foundation and then dropping this new thing on, which is so oddly shaped, it's not really a drop. It's a lot of stick building. So, yeah, I don't get that. I think that, personally, and this is just a design preference, I think it's a nice design. But I do think the massing is tall with respect to its neighbors. I'm also not seeing, there's a reference to 23631B, but this is an R2. I don't see why that's being used in the analysis here. It's 23631A has a 1-to-1 height factor and a maximum street wall of 25 feet from the front yard setback. I didn't see that was described. Also, it has those side yard setbacks of 30 feet, so I need to see that that's been employed. I do understand that, so there's a proposal to install an entire solar roof. And I understand that you need that slope for your solar roof, and that's kind of cool that you've got a solar roof. But only a portion of the attic is occupied with a bedroom. So, and even the mechanical room has a 10-foot ceiling height, and I know enough about solar, or not a lot, but a little, but that you can have it actually on 2 levels. You don't have to have the entire array on 1 level. You could drop it down to something else.
As long as there's no shadow cast on it.
Right, okay, so.
Two levels.
What we need also, just to better understand the massing in relationship to the neighbors, is an axonometric of the house and an insertion into the photo streetscape. It's difficult to get a good sense of the massing and its impact on the neighbors. Again, the request for those things is actually to help your argument, help us understand whether or not the building is compatible with neighborhood character. And then, this is something kind of I wrote in the middle of the night last night, completely tormented by that horrible fire this weekend.
Oh my God.
The fire is in a neighborhood where we have a lot of these 73622s, and had they had hardwired fire alarms, and had it been fully sprinklered, I doubt there would have been anyone killed in it. And so my tendency, I don't know actually what the 2014 code is requiring of these houses. Is it requiring full sprinklers?
They should be required to sprinkle, yeah.
Yeah, but I don't know whether the code is requiring it, but because, one of the things that occurs.
New building.
For existing building?
It's a new building.
Well, so that's the
Oh, so
thing,
it's a
they'll
new
file,
building.
no, but they're going
It's a
to
new
file it
building.
not as an NB, they'll file it as an
An alt one.
alteration.
Yeah, they'll file as an alt, and they won't get.
Right, and so it won't need to be. And so I look at this and I say, there's a reason why there are side yard setbacks. The reason for them is fire spread. And where we're looking at reductions in allowable side yards or allowable rear yards, it's only, I don't know, by the fire department's, courage or something, that this fire that was so terrible didn't spread to neighbors. Like in Breezy Point, it took down an entire neighborhood. And so I'm thinking that from now on, with all of these, where side yards are part of the reduction, we should require full sprinklers and hard wiring on the fire alarm systems. And that's like the price you pay for coming here. And maybe a price you won't have to pay because you came here. So, anybody else? Well,
Regarding the side yard reduction, they're supposed to show us that it's separately and individually owned in 1961 and present, which they didn't do. And I think they should show compliance with the front yard landscaping. And it really doesn't fit into the streetscape very well, but that's basically because they're trying to maximize their southern exposure. So, you don't want to stand in the way of progress either.
no, I think it's a good design, but I do think they could accomplish some of the massing. They could break up the massing a little bit and still attain their angle. But, it's true that it's a contemporary design versus those classic ones.
Right.
And so how do you do that? And it's not a historic district. It has to do with neighborhood character and massing, right? It's not about whether you pick shingles versus stucco or something.
Also, I didn't see a survey.
Okay.
And it's not clear to me why they need to cantilever the structure over top of their existing foundation. They've got sort of this interesting L shape, and then I see that they, sort of clearly are cantilevering over, I guess, on the east side of the building.
They're cantilevering because they're taking advantage of that extra
Of that
side
extra
yard,
piece.
and I don't think they should.
And I'm not clear on that either, but also on the other side, they're sort of counterbalancing it, and I'm just wondering, if this is some sort of prefabricated structure, are they doing this because they have a width that they need to sustain, and they're just trying, looking at how they're constructing the foundation, maybe that's true, but if that's the case, then they should talk about why they need to have that.
Right. The build-it backs, which are clearly prefabs.
Yeah, they've got,
Where you have no choice.
this piece which seems to be holding this back here, and then they're cantilevering.
On both sides.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. And if prefab, that's interesting that there are prefab houses with solar arrays and the whole thing. What's the company?
Probably out of
Okay.
Germany. Germany does a lot of that.
Yeah, German, right.
It's got to be
Anything
German.
else? Okay.
Item number 3, 24214BZ, 212 East 57th Street, Manhattan.
Okay, this is a legalization of a physical cultural establishment. We do have fire department and Department of Investigation sign off. So I went on the website, and the website says you can book a massage today. So the statement of fact says they don't have massage therapists engaged. So what was their plan when I called, sending me to the competition? The details on the sound attenuation at the walls don't show where they are provided. It just shows 2 types of walls, and we don't know where they're located. One's called perimeter and one's called interior, but that doesn't mean a lot to me because they all seem to be interior. There's no details also of the ceiling provided for sound attenuation. The plans need to show where weight and equipment rooms are, which helps us understand the source of noise, treadmills, that kind of stuff. And I assume because of the use of the building, there's residential above, so noise is potentially a disturbance. We also need sprinkler and alarm drawings, and to show that those have been signed off by the fire department and DOB, because it's an occupied space. We need to know that it's sprinklered and has fire alarms in place. The notes on the drawings should be changed to reflect that the fire alarm and sprinklers have been installed and STC ratings have been achieved and all of those will be maintained during the life of the permit. Also, I didn't find the elevator to the lower level to meet ADA requirements. Anyone else?
I don't think they have
Kind of
one.
you're born there.
Never leave.
And never leave.
Right, it
Anybody
didn't
else?
seem they had ADA access to the cellar, but we've had some PCEs where if they offer equivalent
On the first floor. another
services
level,
on the
yeah.
ground floor, it's been accepted.
Okay, so maybe that's, but then they would need to show some sort of sign off from DOB that that was accepted,
Yeah,
right?
do they need the
What?
From the
sign
mayor's
from
office, too.
I don't really know if they
We
need,
usually include a condition in the grant that DOB will verify the compliance with accessibility provisions.
but condition in the grant, but they're already occupying. That's the difficulty when they're not
DOB
going
won't
for a
give them a
permit.
C of O, unfortunately, if they don't
Yeah.
comply.
Like they need like they ever would go for a CFO.
I'm naive.
You know what I mean? So I think, though, that normally there would be an objection by the plan examiner, and then it gets cured by some kind of response. So let's see the objection and how DOB responded, or how the applicant responded to DOB.
That's it.
Okay.
This concludes the public review session for March 23rd, 2015.